history interview with T. Carl Moore, class of 1936, conducted by Brian Etheridge on August 22, 1995, at his home in Atlanta, Georgia. The subject of this interview is student life at Georgia Tech. Mr. Moore, thank you for having us at your home. I'd like you to start at the beginning. Tell us about your story.
All right. My student days at Georgia Tech occurred during the Great Depression of the 1930s. I was reared in a small town of White Plains, Georgia. I went to Greensboro High School, which was located 12 miles away. It had 11 grades, which was customary for all of the rural schools in Georgia in those days. I entered Georgia Tech as a co-op student for the summer quarter of 1931, along with about 30 others. A like number of co-ops entered for the fall quarter.
Well, what motivated you to come to Georgia Tech? What made you want to go?
The only place I could have possibly afforded to go, to come as a co-op somewhere, primarily. The first year, the co-op department had no jobs for freshmen. After I finished my summer quarter in school, I had to go back home. Dr. McDaniel, who was head of the co-op department, could barely get enough jobs for the majority of upperclassmen in those years. I went back home, did a few odd jobs, and somehow my parents scraped up enough for me to come back for the second school quarter. After that, I teamed up with an enterprising co-op student named Sam Long from Mississippi, who had opened up a hamburger stand in a small one-room shack on North Avenue next door to the All Saints Episcopal Church. We stayed open 24 hours a day because we got some business from milkmen and other night workers late at night. We each worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and barely, at the end of that time, I'd barely cleared enough to somehow get back to school for another school quarter. In desperation, I went out for the football team, hoping that I could play well enough to get some help from the Athletic Association for my tuition. I played in high school, and I became a member of the Gray Devil team, which we learned the plays of Tech's opponents, and we scrimmaged against the varsity. My football career ended about a month later when I got a bad knee injury from trying to tackle the star quarterback, whose name was Shorty Roberts.
What position did you play?
I tried to play fullback, but I didn't have the weight to do it, so it was a very unwise thing for me to have tried to do, really.
Who coached the Gray Devils team? And was that Coach Alexander also, or was it someone else?
It was someone else. I believe it was a Thorpe at that time. I didn't stay long enough to get to know them very well anyway. After my freshman year, the co-op department did help me find employment. With that, along with borrowing money from the student loan fund and some help from my parents, I was able to get through. One quarter, I worked for the Southern Spring Bed Company, putting little springs between the big springs and mattresses. My fingers stayed very sore all of that quarter. Another quarter, I worked as a full-time busboy in the tech dining hall. Then for two quarters, I was a curb boy at a drive-in barbecue stand named Pig and Whistle. There were two Pig and Whistles that employed co-ops. One was on Ponce de Leon Avenue and one was on Peachtree Road. Our pay was only the tips that we received, and we had to pay the company 20 cents per day for the laundry of the white coats that we wore. Nevertheless, an energetic curb boy could make out fairly well with the tips that he got.
These types of co-op jobs, they weren't related to your electrical engineering major that much, were they?
Well, not exactly. Well, we also learned something about the facts of life on this job. In the evenings when we went down to pick up trays from cars in the back dimly lit parking lots, we learned about discretion. The chance for a tip could easily be wrecked if you interrupted a love scene. Prohibition was in effect in those days, and we didn't handle or sell whiskey, but bootleggers would come by and leave their cards with us to hand out to customers. The customer could then go to an outdoor payphone and arrange with a bootlegger for a delivery in the back parking lot. And the customer usually left us a nice tip.
Would the bootlegger leave you a tip for distributing his cards?
The bootlegger occasionally would pass out free samples to some of the curb boys. The highlight of that job with Pig and Whistle was a special assignment for which I was chosen. The Chicago World's Fair, called the Century of Progress Exhibition, was in full swing in 1933 and 34. Arrangements were made for an excursion train to be run from Atlanta to take people to the fair. And the Pig and Whistle got the concession for furnishing the food on the excursion train. A cook and another co-op student and I were chosen to work the train. So I walked all the way to Chicago and back, going up and down the aisles, selling sandwiches and drinks. The company paid for our 3-day stay in a Chicago hotel and gave us admission tickets to the fair. The passengers all knew we were co-op students and were fairly liberal with their tips. I used some of those tips, and my other co-op friend did too, to buy a ticket to a very popular sideshow attraction to see the world-famous striptease fan dancer, Sally Rand. She sure could manipulate those fans. Both the fans she used and the ones in the audience. During my junior and senior year, I had a good co-op job with the Georgia Power Company. Although it provided very little practical experience for my major in electrical engineering, it paid $80 a month, which was a good salary. The power company operated the streetcar system in Atlanta, and I worked for the transportation engineering department. My job was to stand at busy intersections during morning and afternoon rush hours to record data. I would write down as the cars came by, I would write down the route number, the destination of the car number, the time it went by, and an accurate estimate of the number of people on the cars, on each car. And we would take this data back to the office where it would be, where graphs were made to determine the optimum number of additional cars needed for rush hour traffic.
Wow.
During my 5 years at Tech, I lived in the CoOp dormitory, Cloudman Hall, for I believe 2 semesters, 2 quarters they were. I lived in various rooming houses on North Avenue in Ponce de Leon, and for 2 years in an old 2-story wooden house owned by Georgia Tech at 636 William Street. Co-ops occupied that house as well as its twin next door at 646 William Street. I helped defray the cost of my food by working a few hours in dining rooms and sandwich shops. My mother sent me care packages, and I really never went hungry. I couldn't afford to join a social fraternity, but I did become a member of the Co-op Club and the Brian Society and the honorary engineering fraternity Tau Beta Pi. During one quarter, I went to a WPA night school and learned how to type. My social life was somewhat limited by finances. I did enjoy the Tech dances, to which I usually went stag. Occasionally I would splurge by renting or sharing a rental car with another student, a U-Drive-It, to bring dates to dances. In the summer between my junior and senior years, I met the girl that I later married, and we will celebrate our 56th wedding anniversary in November of this year. I graduated with honor in 1936, and I had 2 job offers. One was with the Tennessee Valley Authority, paying $110 per month. The other was to become a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps. With war clouds on the horizon, the Marine Corps was expanding and offered a limited number of regular commissions to various colleges that had advanced ROTCs. Georgia Tech was allocated 3 such commissions that year, excuse me, and I accepted one of them instead of becoming a second lieutenant in the Army Reserve. I didn't know anything about the Marine Corps, except that the pay was $120 a month for a second lieutenant, plus allowances for food and quarters. I took the highest paying job. I served in World War II and the Korean conflict, retiring as a colonel in 1964 after 28 years of service. I came back to Georgia, taught mathematics in the Atlanta public school system, and then worked as an administrator at Emory University until 1985. I have been retired since then. I'm most grateful to Georgia Tech for providing me with a college education. The co-op program was a godsend for me. Since coming back to Atlanta, my contacts with the Alumni Association, such as working with class reunions and going on trips and so forth, have made Tech an even more meaningful part of my life. Thank you, Georgia Tech.
That's a wonderful sentiment. Stepping back a little bit, you mentioned that you were in the Co-op Club. What exactly did the Co-op Club do?
It was primarily a social club for co-ops, and we had dances at the end of each quarter. I was vice president for the club for 2 years, I believe, and each section had its own offices.
You mentioned the Brian Society. What was that?
That was an honorary co-op club. I believe it's still, is it still in existence? I don't know.
You briefly mentioned some of your academic life. What were some memorable professors that you had?
Oh, I guess Professor Boggs in chemistry. There was a Professor Narmore in mechanical engineering and drawing, and I guess he was most memorable because at the end of, he succeeded in supplementing his income by selling insurance to the graduates of the seniors each year, which was interesting. But he was a very personable individual. And then the various ones in the electrical engineering department, most of whom I do not remember very well.
What was the class schedule like back then?
We had separate co-ops had separate classes from regulars. I suppose they still do. We took the same subjects. I guess this is still true. We took the same subjects that the regulars took, except we took them in a 12-week period. And so we went to school for 5 years. That would be 30 months, and we covered in 30 months basically what the regular students covered in 36 months in 4 years of 9 months. But except for a foreign language, we did not have to take a foreign language at that time.
What was a typical day when you were in class? How long were classes during the day? Did you have to go to school on Saturday?
Yes, we went to school mornings and afternoons and half days Saturday, right.
So while you were in school, you were still doing odd jobs around to make ends meet, right?
Yes, I worked in the dining hall to get my meals. Part of the time, there was a sandwich shop on North Avenue that I worked at. I had a job at to earn my meals.
So you were a pretty busy guy back then.
We were fairly busy, yes.
How did you study? Whenever you could get a chance, I guess.
Yes, I studied a fair amount. I was not distracted by social fraternity life, so I had a little more time to study, and I did.
What athletic events did you attend while you were at school?
All the football games that I could. A few of the basketball games, but then lacrosse. They had lacrosse was played too.
What was what would you do when you would go to a football game? Was it a big party?
No. Freshmen, of course, at that time when Georgia Tech would win, during the freshman year, if Georgia Tech won a game, the freshmen would all have to do a snake dance across the stage in the Fox Theater, interrupting whatever was going on at the time for about an hour, and that was condoned more or less. The policeman sort of guided us through that, let us do that to celebrate.
Did you have to wear a rat cap as a freshman?
Oh yeah, yes.
What were the rules that governed wearing your rat cap?
If you found that if they caught you outdoors without it on, an upperclassman, they would take care of it, the situation.
Do you remember could you describe maybe a little bit how the campus was back then? How big it was?
It was small. It ran from North Avenue and over to Well, to William Street was one boundary, North Avenue was the other, the 5th Street, I believe, was the other boundary.
Where were most of your classes held?
In the electrical engineering building, the old mechanical building, they were all bunched together there. There was a few classes were held in the administrative building, the old administrative building. Go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned with an enterprising student trying to run a hamburger stand. I imagine you got a lot of competition from the varsity back then.
Yes, but we got a sort of a different type of trade. The varsity was primarily drive-in business, and we had 4 little stools that people could sit down at and order hamburgers, and our prices were a little bit better than the varsity.
You probably got sick of hamburgers after a while. Where else would you eat?
Well, we had chili to put on the hamburger, on the hot dogs, and we did have some lettuce and tomato that we put on the hamburgers, so that helped.
But where else would you eat in Atlanta?
Well, of course, when I worked at the Pig and Whistle, I ate at the Pig and Whistle, but at other times there were boarding houses along North Avenue where dormitories are now. There were 1 or 2 boarding houses that had very economical meals, and so if you ate one meal there and it was a family-style service, you could eat as much as you wanted to. That would sort of last you throughout the day.
So there were no meal plans back then. You just ate where you could.
There were meal plans in the dining hall, and you could buy meal tickets. There were meal books, but the private establishments had better prices, and you got a limited amount at the dining hall, as I remember. You couldn't eat all you wanted to for a meal ticket, but it enabled you to eat up to a certain amount.
Were you in the ROTC during your days?
Yes, I was in the Signal Corps, since I took electrical engineering, co-op students were in the Signal Corps.
What was that like?
Well, we drilled, and we got a little bit of money for buying uniforms. Our uniforms were furnished, and we got a small amount of money for the drills that we did. I don't remember how much, very little.
So you would only be in the ROTC when you're going to classes, right?
That's right, that's right.
You wouldn't have to participate in anything when you were on your co-op jobs.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned your graduation. Where was your graduation held?
Graduation was held in the Fox Theater.
Really? Did your family, were they able to come down?
Yes, my family came up from White Plains, Georgia for that, right.
Proud day, I bet.
Yes.
Can you remember what the Fox Theater looked like back then? It was recently opened, wasn't it?
Yes, it had been open for 2 or 3 years. I don't remember exactly when it opened. It looked like very much what it does now. The stars were in the ceiling, and there was a big Wurlitzer organ there, and they would always use before events that occurred, there would be an organ playing, and
were movies shown at the Fox Theater also?
Yes, they were.
In terms of social life, you said it was kind of limited. What else besides dances? Would you attend movies other places also?
Occasionally, when I could afford it, yes, I would occasionally go to movies.
Okay. What was your military service like? I mean, did you find, were you able to put your Georgia Tech degree to use in the military?
You mean after I graduated? Yes, indirectly, I did some artillery in the military, and as well as infantry, and the mathematical part of it certainly was helpful. All right. What was your question?
It was what I understand that you were present at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, when people ask me what was I doing when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, my answer is that I was in a house on a peninsula that stuck out into Pearl Harbor, in bed with a hula girl.
And I was a little girl.
I thought she might say that, but I was married. I'd been out to setting up defenses on Midway and Wake and some of the other islands, outlying islands. I'd come back in, and my unit was re-equipping to go back to some other islands in the Pacific, expecting war might be imminent. And we had gone out there in 1940, or early 41, and I was married. I married in 39, and my wife had a baby in March, and so after the baby she took hula lessons to regain her strength, and because she wanted to learn how to hula, and so that's why I was in bed with a hula girl. And so she was there present too, and saw the attack, and we had one of the planes strafed our house, and a lot of shrapnel fell around there. One of the bullets went through that went through the house, went right over the crib where our baby girl had been standing about 3 minutes before. My wife had picked her up and had her in her arms, so there was no harm done there.
Was there any warning at all that you were about to be attacked?
No.
None. The first thing you knew, your house was getting strafed.
Well, no. The first thing we knew, we heard the planes flying low over our house, headed for the ships in the harbor primarily, and we could actually see the pilots in the plane when we looked out the door. So the torpedo planes were that low. The dive bombers were something different. We couldn't see them, but.
Did you immediately? How did you take cover?
We didn't. We lived. There wasn't any place to take cover. We didn't have a basement in the house since it was on the edge of the harbor, but we did sort of stand in doorways, and then as it eased up, at first we were not sure that it was an attack. We thought it was a maneuver, but we heard all the noise, and then we heard the bombs, and then I walked around, went over to another point of the harbor where I could see the ships, and I saw a ship roll over, and I was pretty satisfied that it was a real thing, and so I had to come back and finish dressing, getting in my uniform, and I had to report in for my duty station in the harbor itself.
So, I mean, as the attack was going on, you guys were taking cover, and then you had to report you still had to report for duty even though there was an attack going on?
Yes, well, there were lulls in the attack, and I did sort of wait for a lull, and then got in my car and drove around. I had to drive halfway around the harbor on a road along the edge of it to get into the harbor itself. And then I was there by the time the second wave came in, and I had to leave my wife and baby and down on the peninsula, where she joined in with 2 or 3 other wives who were in the same situation that I was.
And so, what did you guys try and do when you reported for duty?
Well, I joined my unit, and we were madly trying to set up machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, or anything that we could, and we did, and we fired a few rounds, and everyone was a little not a little panicky, and they some people, you know, would get out and fly a .45 caliber pistol at a Jap plane 10,000 feet up in the air. But we claimed that we shot down one with some machine guns that we got set up. So a whole lot of other people claim that they shot it down too. But
so you realized when the attack started that this was it? This was the beginning of World War II
yes,
for America?
Yes, we knew that was it. And then later, my wife and baby came back to the States. They were evacuated back since civilians were being taken out of Hawaii at that time. And I went on from there to a place called Guadalcanal, which people ask what is a Guadalcanal these days, but it was an island down in the South Pacific.
And what'd you do there?
Well, we had a touch-and-go battle for 6 months with the Japanese in Guadalcanal. I have several books, history books of it. It was a major turning point in World War II. It was the first offensive in the Pacific that the U.S. took, and so it was touch and go for 6 months before we finally secured the place.
Were you serving aboard a ship, or were you?
No, I was with an anti-aircraft unit at that time, and a Seacoast Artillery unit.
Were you in service until the end of the war?
I was in service until 1964. Yes, yes, until the end of the war. After Guadalcanal and a brief stop in New Zealand, I came back to the States for about a year, and then went back to the Marshall Islands and to Guam, and was loading aboard ships with my units. I was a lieutenant colonel by then and had a battalion. I was loading aboard an LST, preparing for the invasion of Japan when the war ended.
We recently celebrated that 50th anniversary here recently.
Yes.
Do you remember where you were, what it was like when the surrender was official?
Oh yes, I was on Guam, and we celebrated. We went out and fired up guns. We didn't really do much firing. We just celebrated. It was quite a relief.
And so after World War II, then the next?
My next service was in Korea during the Korean conflict there, and so I was there as a regimental commander in 1952. And we just got back 3 weeks ago from going up to Washington, where we dedicated a Korean War Memorial, which was finally Korea got a little recognition.
After Korea, did you return to the States?
Well, I haven't. I moved around quite a bit during, after World War I, and to the States, to various places, to World War II, I mean, yeah. Well, yes.
How was it when you retired in '64? You then became, you said, a math teacher, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you get to put your technical degree to any use there?
Yes, my mathematics came in very handy then. I did have to go back. I went back to George Washington University and got a master's degree in education. We were stationed in Washington when I retired, and so I stayed up there for a year until I got my master's, and then came back to Atlanta and taught school.
How long did you do that for?
I taught school for 6 years in Northside High School, and then worked out at Emory University as an administrator for about 11 years. Retired in '85.
Well, is there any other memories, tech or otherwise, that you'd like to share with us?
No, I believe that about covers it.
Well, thank you very much for having us in your home. It was, if you had to sum up tech, you would say it was a good experience?
Oh, very, very definitely. Yes, indeed. I appreciate it more and more each day. Right.
Thank you very much.
Right.